She was the pride of the Great Lakes. One November storm took her in minutes. She was 729 feet of solid American steel, the largest ship on the Great Lakes when she was launched, a freighter so famous and so admired that the sailors simply called her the Mighty Fitz. On the evening of November 10, 1975, she was battling a monstrous storm on Lake Superior, in radio contact with another freighter just behind her. Her captain's last words were calm, almost reassuring, the words of a veteran who had seen rough weather 100 times before. "We are holding our own." And then, minutes later, she vanished from the radar screen. No distress call, no mayday, no survivors, no bodies ever recovered. 29 men gone into the freezing water in the space between two radar sweeps, and a mystery that has haunted the Great Lakes for 50 years. This is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. When she first sailed in 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald was a genuine marvel of her age. Named for the president of the insurance company that financed her construction, she was the biggest carrier on the Great Lakes. A true giant of the inland seas. Her job was relentless and vital. She hauled taconite, iron ore crushed and pressed into small, hard pellets, from the mines of Minnesota, down across the lakes to the hungry steel mills of the lower Great Lakes. Over her long career, she logged well over 1 million miles, the equivalent of dozens of trips around the entire world. She was a familiar, beloved sight on the water, fast and dependable, a record setter that hauled more cargo than almost anything else afloat. In her final season, she was commanded by Captain Ernest McSorley, a deeply experienced master with more than 4 decades on the Great Lakes behind him. For McSorley, and for several of his crew, this run was meant to be among the last before a well-earned retirement. On November 9, 1975, the Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with more than 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, bound for a mill near Detroit. The vast surface of Lake Superior lay calm and deceptively peaceful as she set out. But anyone who truly knows that lake knows never to trust its calm. A powerful storm system was building, sweeping up out of the Great Plains and heading straight for the Great Lakes. And the National Weather Service began issuing warnings that grew steadily more serious through the night and into the next day. Soon those warnings escalated to a full storm warning. The Fitzgerald was not alone out on the water that night. A second large freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, was traveling the same general route, perhaps 15 miles behind her, and the two captains, in radio contact, agreed to take a more northerly course, the route that ships traditionally use to find some shelter from the worst of Lake Superior's weather. But the lake had other plans, and to understand what came next, you have to understand the reputation of Lake Superior itself. It is the largest of the Great Lakes, larger in surface area than some entire countries, and in November it transforms into one of the most genuinely dangerous bodies of water on Earth. The storms that form there in late autumn can generate hurricane-force winds and waves that rise like moving hills of black water. The old sailors had a saying, immortalized later in song, that the lake never gives up her dead because the water is so cold that bodies do not rise. On the night of November 10th, the Edmund Fitzgerald sailed directly into the heart of that fury. Winds gusted to near 100 miles per hour. Waves climbed to 35 feet and higher, some perhaps far higher. Blinding snow squalls swept across the deck, and the great ship was pushed and pounded by seas of almost unimaginable power. As the evening wore on, Captain McSorley began reporting trouble to the Anderson behind him. The Fitzgerald had taken some topside damage. She had developed a list, a lean to one side that would not correct. And worst of all, she had lost the use of both of her radar systems, leaving her nearly blind in the screaming dark, forced to navigate by radio guidance relayed from the Anderson. She was, by McSorley's own reports, taking on water. And yet, through all of it, his transmissions remained remarkably composed, the voice of a man who had weathered storms his entire life. When the Anderson radioed across the gale to ask how the Fitzgerald was holding up in the punishing seas, McSorley gave his now immortal reply. 3 words that would echo for half a century. "We are holding our own." It was sometime shortly after 7 in the evening, around 1:15, when the men aboard the Anderson looked down at their radar screen and realized, with creeping horror, that the Edmund Fitzgerald was simply no longer there. She had not radioed for help. She had not fired a single flare into the sky. In the chaos and the snow, the largest ship on the Great Lakes had vanished completely in the space between 2 sweeps of the radar. The men of the Anderson, themselves still fighting their own desperate battle for survival against the same storm, made the agonizing decision, and later turned their ship back to search the black, heaving water. They found nothing. No lifeboats with survivors, no men in the water. The lake had taken all 29 of them. 4 days later, on November 14, a United States Navy aircraft, equipped with a sensitive magnetic detector, finally located the wreck. She lay about 17 miles from the safety of Whitefish Bay, in some 530 feet of cold water, and she was broken into 2 great pieces on the bottom of Lake Superior. The lifeboats were later found, but they told a grim story. They were twisted and badly damaged, never properly launched, apparently torn from their mountings as the ship went down. Whatever had happened, it had happened far too fast for any man aboard to escape. So what sank the Mighty Fitz? 50 years later, no one can say with absolute certainty, and that lingering uncertainty is a large part of why she still haunts us. 2 major federal investigations studied the disaster and reached careful, sobering conclusions. The Coast Guard suggested the most probable cause was massive flooding of the cargo hold through hatch covers that had failed to keep the enormous boarding waves out, slowly and invisibly robbing the ship of the buoyancy that kept her afloat, until riding lower and lower, she finally plunged without warning. But other theories endure and are fiercely debated to this day. Some believe she struck a shoal in the shallows and tore open her hull. Some believe she was overwhelmed by a series of 3 giant rogue waves that Great Lakes sailors call the 3 Sisters. Others point to structural stress finally breaking her apart. The truth very likely lies in some terrible combination of these forces. And because there were no survivors and no distress call, the full and final answer may simply never be known. What is certain is the human cost, and the way an entire nation refused to forget it. The story inspired a haunting ballad that carried the names and the memory of the lost far beyond the shores of the Great Lakes, into the hearts of millions who had never seen Lake Superior. The wreck itself is now legally protected as a gravesite, the remains of the 29 crewmen left in peace beneath the cold, dark water where they fell. And each year, in churches and at memorials around the lakes, the Fitzgerald's bell is rung in their honor, 29 times, once for every man who did not come home. She was the pride of the Great Lakes, a towering symbol of American industry at its mightiest, a ship that seemed almost too big and too strong to fail. And in the end, Even she could not master the lake that the old sailors always warned never gives up her dead. The Edmund Fitzgerald remains the most famous shipwreck in the entire history of the Great Lakes. Not because of how large she was, but because of how suddenly, how completely, and how silently she was taken.